The New York Post.
You can do it, folks.
Come on.
Do it.
Bombshell ICE sweep in Minneapolis, St. Paul finds 50% of immigrants had committed immigration fraud. Now, of course, there is the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, and we call Minneapolis, St. Paul the cities of brother-sister love.
It's very true.
Very, very true.
Oh, man.
There's a whole country like this, actually.
He went there.
Yeah.
Several. There's a region, actually.
Yeah, there's.
Don't their cousins usually, do something?
I don't know about that. I just know
Rates-
that
rates
brothers
of
and
cousin
sisters really
marriage.
love each other. Nearly half of all immigrants
What's
in
wrong with
Minneapolis,
loving
St.
your
Paul.
brother and sister, Tim?
This is kind of love.
What do you mean?
Nearly half of all immigrants in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Twin Cities were found to have committed some form of immigration fraud during a recent sweep by immigration authorities. Officers encountered blatant marriage fraud, visa overstay, people claiming to work at businesses that can't be found, forged documents, abuse of the H-1B visa system, abuse of the F-1 visa, and many other discrepancies. Officials didn't point to a specific group, but the Twin Cities has seen a massive uptick in Somali refugees and immigrants in recent years, with more than 82,000 from the East African country living in Minnesota. Are they going to deport Ilhan?
That'd be so big.
So committing immigration fraud and education fraud as well, is grounds for having your citizenship revoked and being denaturalized. Every naturalized citizen knows this. They all know it is one of the penalties. And so, so if you lose your citizenship, then yes, you can be deported, and you have to be deported because you don't have a citizenship. Remember, she was a citizen of Somalia. She came over as a war refugee. Her father was on the losing side of a coup there. And she comes to the United States, and there's a lot of documentary evidence about something very strange going on with a man who, and remember, these stories about, we make the jokes about the brother stuff. Those stories originally came from the Somali community in Minnesota. There were blogs and rumors, and this all came up and said, well, wait a minute. And, there's different naming conventions. They have tribal naming conventions, which are different than sort of like the Western first name, last name that we're used to in the US. And so people are coming up and saying, wait a minute, this guy doesn't have the same last name, but actually, if you understand the naming convention, he is her brother. And here's this marriage document. And again, a lot of these questions, a lot of this needs to get investigated. And here you have the USCIS director saying, we found rampant fraud in immigration, specifically marriage fraud. And everyone knows, of course, that that marriage is, the green card marriage, this is something that's rampant because it puts you on the fast track to citizenship.
Let me ask you, Jack, what do you think happens in this country if they do denaturalize and deport Ilhan Omar, meaning she is expelled from Congress, citizenship revoked, then sent back to Somalia? What's the left reaction?
I mean, they're going to freak out. They would be probably on the tarmac trying to stop the plane from taking off.
I think that's the kind of political moment that could ignite a powder keg.
And it absolutely. I mean, we already have powder kegs. I mean,
I know, and they're going off.
They asked me. They said, do you think CNN asked me, do you think we're in a civil war? And I said, well, look what they just did to Charlie. I mean, I don't know if you call it a traditional, but asymmetric, fifth generation.
Well, so and that's the challenge, because I've been reading a lot about, as I mentioned this before, French Revolution, Spanish Revolution, and Bleeding Kansas. And one argument,
a guy wrote a book about some of that stuff.
Yeah. One argument as to why we're actually in a civil war is fifth generational warfare, meaning psychological manipulation, resource depletion, and strategies like that indicate there's a real fight for power. However, in terms of raw violence, it looks very much like Bleeding Kansas.
Yeah. So when we wrote the book on humans, where we talked about that, and people would say, this question about are we in a communist revolution? Is it leading towards a civil war, destabilization scenario? And people would push back at us and say, well, wait, we're not seeing things like the French Revolution or the Spanish Civil War, the Bolshevik Revolution taking place. And the argument that we made is that because warfare has changed since those times, which were in many cases 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago, that we shouldn't expect it to necessarily look like it did in the past. And by the way, thank God it doesn't, right? Because these were absolutely horrific. But we are seeing a fifth generation wave of a communist revolution, this asymmetric warfare that's gone on. It includes censorship, it includes shunnings, it includes political arrest, and absolutely includes political assassinations. Like, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And you see direct parallels as well to Bleeding Kansas, as you just mentioned, where it sort of became this free-for-all where there was violence, there was reprisal violence, and then it just spilled over.
They killed reporters.
Yep.
People who were writing either and it was both sides.
You mean like
I'm not gonna.
a Nick Shirley?
Yeah, they burned down newspaper. One of the big stories, I think, one of the big catalysts was.
This needs to be taken seriously. It really does.
Yeah, you know what's fascinating is how do you move a river is the issue, and the flow of culture in this country and the direction that's going is that at some point the river bifurcated, and as much as there have been people, and I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about these other journalists and writers who have warned we're on the path of a civil war. There seems to be no way to resolve it because, I mean, what, Trump's not going to agree to go to prison for no reason just because they say he should, and they're not going to back down because they're ideologically driven and they want Trump in prison. There's no stopping. It's an immovable object, an unstoppable force. The Democrats are the unstoppable force. The right is the immovable object. So it seems like no matter what you say, and even if you do take it seriously, the only real way to take something like this seriously is to, like, I don't know, bury a shipping container underground and get a generator and then prepare for the worst.
Yeah. I mean, that's why the Trump administration with a total crackdown, total destruction of leftism is the last off-ramp, because it really does feel like this is the last moment to put a lid on this.
Yeah, so and this is the problem when you mention, Bleeding Kansas, that violence has the unfortunate, and you mentioned as well, violence has the unfortunate tendency to spiral and beget more violence. It escalates, and this is why you need a government to come in and put it down. Charlie and I did an interview talking about the Bolshevik Revolution, and we just pulled it up, and we're pulling up some of the old clips. And he asked me this question. It was so smart. It was so insightful. He said, Jack, how many communists were there in the early days of the Bolshevik Revolution? I said, probably a couple thousand. And he said, what was the population of the Russian Empire? And I actually got it wrong in the interview, and I'll cop to that. I said 50 million. It was actually 100 million at the time.
Wow.
Some studies say even higher. It was also in the middle of a war, so parts of it were disputed, and but north of 100 million. And so he was asking the question: how did so few a group of people take over a country that was so large? And I said, because they didn't take it seriously.
Yeah.
They didn't take it seriously, and they kept infiltrating. By the way, it's funny you mentioned this, because what did we talk about today? What was one of the first places that the communists and the Bolsheviks infiltrated in Russia was the military. One of the very first places they did, and they went in under the name of social reform, and they would say these units need to be more diverse, and we need people's units. And so a lot of those original Red Army units were defectors directly from the Imperial Army of Russia.
Wow.
And they would go in, and they'd have one political commissar would flip over an entire unit saying, the Tsar is against Russia. You have to fight for the people to take down the Tsar. And it eventually got to the point where, when it wasn't taken seriously and it was just a couple of thousand people, these, quote unquote, little bits of violence. And Tsar Nicholas wasn't even the first Tsar who was assassinated, but he was the last one who was assassinated, because they drug him and his wife and children into a basement, shot the wife and shot his wife, shot him, and then bayoneted the children to death.
Yeah, they said that they said, look, we were just going to remove you from power, but we can't risk any of your children ever having a claim to thrones.
Correct.
The people must prevail, so we're going to end your lineage now. Wow. Killing his children.
The protection to me against civil war, you've heard me bring this up. Obviously, I believe it's personal faith, right? In terms of people reclaiming these things, because what is it historically that has held people in check and given people a true north? One of the people I think that we should look to is Desmond Doss. Anyone seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so he was a man that he had certain practices.
He was a pacifist.
Yeah. And particularly one of the points here is that he, like Charlie, had an observance of the Sabbath. That if you look at Exodus, it specifically says that when they could keep these holy days, that it was a protection to them. And it actually stopped pestilence and sword. Actually, destruction was averted if they could keep these holy days. It specifically says that. And the words were, let us offer to God in the wilderness, lest he fall upon us with sword or with pestilence. So he's saying, if we can keep this, then there will not be pestilence and sword, violence. And if you look at DOS, right? So if you look at Conscientious Objector was the documentary that the film was based on. 6 times a Japanese soldier reports that he had DOS in his crosshair. And every time he would pull the trigger, it would jam. When he would take it off DOS, it would fire.
Wow.
Now tell me how, on an escarpment where people were getting sawn in half with machine gun bullets, it wasn't called Hacksaw Ridge, it was called an escarpment. They all called it Hacksaw Ridge because people's bodies were getting hacksawed in half by machine gun fire. How did Doss get up like a meerkat? He never crawled out of the holes like in the movie. He just popped up like nothing was there and rescued 75 men in one night. He was protected and by God, and he brought a level of protection to all the soldiers around him, so much so that they went back into the battlefield to find his Bible and risk their lives. And another occasion, 2 groups of about 40 men, he was in one, and he had the ability to pray over them. He kept the Sabbath, and they let him observe that as well, which was amazing. And then both groups come back. 3 people come back from one group of 40. His group, 3 or 4. In his group, no one's injured. In the same regions. So I'm saying that these personal faith aspects are protection. I don't think it's a coincidence that Charlie had his book coming out in December. I think that people need to read it and consider it and get close to God during these times, because people will espouse Christianity, concept of Christianity, without actually letting it embody them and letting it become them and getting close to God and knowing what it's like to walk with God and have that deep faith. And instead, they could use it and weaponize it. And that's what I'm encouraging people to step into.
Faith is extremely important, and this is why communists hate the faith. And when we look at Poland and its kind of movement against communism through solidarity, they did it through the church. The church is the #1 enemy against the communists. We also have to remember, communists have killed a tremendous amount of people throughout
100+
recorded
million?
human
Yes,
history.
exactly.
Way more than what we read in the kind of history books. The numbers are just
It's at least
huge
100.
through democide, right? And just understanding that kind of backdrop. I'm always thinking about Yuri Bezmenov, the former KGB agent, that talked about this psychological, ideological kind of subversion that happens in 4 stages to destabilize societies. I think we're at the last stage of what he
Is that
particularly described.
demoralization?
Yeah, that's I believe that's the one. And
we're in
reaching
demoralization.
we're reaching a kind of tipping point where the mask is finally coming off, and we're seeing the kind of true reality of the demon that really is behind big government, communism, central control, top down slavery that wants to take away free human will. And that's why freedom, that's why capitalism, that's why sovereignty, independence is so critically important, and the virtues that we need to stand up and fight for, since the opposite of that literally wants to put the boot on your
And
neck.
I think like the part of the problem is in the short term, like we have to create the conditions that would allow this sort of revival to occur, because in the short term we are dealing with people that just want to kill us. So it's like I'm a Christian. I totally agree. We need to reorient the American people towards Christ. But in the short term, we need to completely destroy these leftists, because I don't want to wait on them to
100%.
potentially come to Christ.
And by the way, Luke, to your point about the demoralization, it wasn't just that it was a leftist who murdered Charlie Kirk. It was about the leftists who celebrated it.
Yeah.
And the fact that this wasn't, yes, you did see like Ilhan Omar and AOC making their comments. You saw Barack Obama go on and smear Charlie even in the same sentence as saying that he, felt bad about what happened. He still has to smear him. He still has to criticize him. He still has to remind people that Charlie was bad. Yeah. And then who were the people who celebrated, right?
All of them?
It was your, it was your doctor, your nurse, your accountant, your HR department. It was people you work with every single day, people you live with on your street. Mm-hmm. And they're sitting there going, some of them are celebrating. And then some of them even will say, it shouldn't have happened, but, and that's a huge problem. Yeah. That just shows you the ideological mental capture that's going on in this society, where they'll say, if you have thoughts, remember, Charlie Kirk never once raised a hand in anger. Just never did it. Go find a video. You wouldn't. And if he had, by the way, that'd be all they're showing right now. Right. He never did that. but because his thoughts were considered so bad and so impure and so evil that they will make justifications for his murder. The murder of a father, the murder of a husband, the murder of a Christian, the murder of someone, again, who was completely peaceful in everything that he did and always put God forward. They will justify his murder. And if you have a group of people like that in your country, and we have a lot of them, I do believe it's a minority, but it's a significant minority. That's a huge problem.
Well, yeah, and like what you're saying, the only thing that's separating
It's the fertile ground for everything that Luke was talking about.
Yeah, and the only thing that's separating those nurses and those teachers and et cetera, from the shooter is that those people have something to lose. Like ideologically, we're dealing with this is all the same thing that we're dealing with, but it's just, yeah, they have something to lose, so they're not going to, I don't know, it's a powder keg, but yeah, that's why it's so important to completely root out this ideology, because it's all the same.
And then like Leonardo DiCaprio has a new movie out glorifying left-wing terrorists, left-wing violence in the same week.
So what do you do about a generation, 2 generations that have a large portion of young people with nothing to lose? They have no families, they have no purpose, and so they're gifted their faux non-theistic religion in wokeness, and they're willing to die for it.
Yeah, this is Mangione, this is Tyler Robinson, this is perhaps Thomas Matthew Crooks to an extent. You see a profile starting to emerge of like Thomas Matthew Crooks, for example, the guy who shot Trump, did hit him, but missed and didn't kill him. He had a 1500 SAT, but he was going to community college. Tyler Robinson, someone who also was seen as he had gotten into this great program, but then had dropped out and was going to trade school. I believe at Utah State actually, where he originally gotten into Utah State, where Turning Point is tonight, where this huge event is going on. So you see this profile emerge of these 20-somethings who have tried to achieve something but lost something. And so what we try to talk about when I've delved into this issue is that what the communist typically does, what the Marxist does, is they will take Zoran Mondami, he talks about this, or Mangione himself, but Ivy League student, right? So they'll take actual grievances like the healthcare system in America. And by the way, as a conservative, guys, it's okay to say the healthcare system in America sucks. It's okay to say that there are huge problems. It's okay to say there are huge housing problems in New York City, by the way, and all over the place in America. But we talk about the housing market. You talk about it, Tim, all the time on this program. But as a conservative, or just as someone who understands these types of revolutions, when we're dealing with them, you have to enact statewide policies that try to mitigate these problems. Yep. And if you don't mitigate these problems, you will get more Mangiones, you will get more victims, you will get, unfortunately, more Charlie Kirks. And I hate to say it because I know what room I'm sitting in, but you will get more, because this is a historical pattern that goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah, well, that's why they're having so much difficulty putting together the pieces with these shooters. And it's because they're losers. They haven't left a legacy. Like, they're completely atomized, unfortunately. And so it's like, yeah, that's why these people are scratching their heads. Like, who are these people? Where did they come from? Why can't we find anything on them? It's like, because they're totally atomized. Like, obviously you're not going to find much on these people.
Yeah, and I have questions. I really do have questions about, these tweets that I've seen where it seems like other people had foreknowledge.
Oh yeah,
and
totally. Yeah.
Questions about photos and just like anyone, I have so many questions.
It's good to have questions.
Even more so in this case, because this is a friend of mine, but at the same time, I do this kind of work. But you want to know what went wrong, and you want to know what happened. But it really, to Tate, to your point, it just comes back to these same issues over and over and over, where people are pushed into more extreme lifestyles. Yeah. Scott Greer had a great piece in American Conservative about internet-based identities. Yeah. And internet-based identities is really something that I've been thinking about the same topic. I didn't have the name for it, but this idea that because the real world has become so disconnected for them, because they disassociate with reality, because they feel disenfranchised from reality, you take more identity from places and things that you interact with on the internet. And so now, by the way,
so they become furries and stuff.
Furries, and this guy was doing into furry porn, including furry, what they call child pornography, or cub porn, in the furry parlance, which is a term that I had to learn recently. And now that's not just, now all of that is to say, it isn't because of the internet or because of video games or because of memes. That's not what drives leftism. The Bolsheviks were not on the internet or playing video games. And it's such a cop-out when I hear, particularly it's a lot of boomers, I gotta say it, will say, oh, it's the Discords and the video games and the internets. No, the Bolsheviks did not have the internet. It's because of these forces that cause people to feel disassociated and disenfranchised with reality.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.